Hello, I'm Tony Mangino from TC2, and this is Staying Connected, where we talk about what really matters to enterprise buyers navigating today's technology and sourcing decisions. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Teresa Knudsen and Julie Gardner, and we'll be diving into negotiating enterprise agreements for Zoom, specifically software, professional services, and transport components. We'll also unpack tricky contract terms, plus understanding how service alternatives and benchmarking can strengthen your negotiating position. So let's start simple. When companies say they're buying Zoom, what are they actually purchasing?
A great question, Tony. Enterprises purchase Zoom licensing and other similar tools for internal communications. That's referred to as Unified Communications or UC, as well as for external customer facing communications. And that's something like Contact Center or CCAS. Today, we're going to focus our discussion on internal communication usage of Zoom for UC. And typically, our clients will look to implement a Zoom solution to improve their collaboration, especially in today's remote and hybrid work environments. Also, to reduce the switching between applications, to cut costs with fewer systems, and to speed up the communication and decision making. Zoom costs are made up of three distinct areas: software licenses, professional services, and audio transport. And we'll talk a little bit about what makes up each of those. On the software license front, those are going to vary based on the products that you're buying and how they're bundled. Options for software licensing include Zoom Phone, Zoom Workplace, Enterprise, Enterprise Plus, meetings, webinars, rooms, etc. So there's all kinds of different options within the software space for Zoom products. On the professional services front, that includes things like deployment, onboarding, integration, and custom support, which can include options for proactive monitoring, reporting, and MACD support, plus also ad hoc support for big webinar events. On the audio transport side, rates for dial-in usage for Zoom meetings, including toll-free, premium, and call-out. And each of these different pricing models has contractual implications. A mistake I often see organizations make is that they negotiate these as a bundle without understanding the cost drivers individually.
Let's talk about where companies usually go wrong here.
The area that we see the companies often go wrong is they don't necessarily know their user base in detail. You really need clarity on the total number of users, the types of users that you have. Are they light users or heavy users? Are they webinar hosts? Are they attendees? If they're a host, how many meetings do they host? And how many attendees are on the meeting? And for how long does those meetings last? You also need to understand your geographic distribution and how other tools in the space have evolved since your last negotiation with Zoom.
Okay, so let's talk leverage. How important is it to understand alternatives, like Microsoft Teams?
Well, it's really critical. Platforms like Microsoft Teams can overlap significantly with Zoom, especially if you're already invested in the Microsoft ecosystem. And even if you don't plan to switch, having a viable alternative changes the negotiation dynamic. And this is where an RFI or request for information comes in. Doesn't have to be a full RFP process, but an RFI will help you to validate your requirements, surface competitive pricing and capabilities. It signals to the vendors that you're evaluating the market, and it often reveals features or bundling options that you didn't initially consider.
Teresa, describe how you know if you're actually getting a good deal.
Well, benchmarking is really critical. You need to have your current and the proposed pricing benchmarked against similarly sized customers. Here at TC2, we regularly provide this type of support insight to compare your pricing and proposed pricing against industry peers, similar sized deals, and market averages.
Without benchmarking, you're negotiating in the dark. Suppliers have far more pricing data and deal points than you do, and they like to bundle things to make the pricing much more vague.
Exactly. And even informal benchmarking can provide dramatically improved outcomes for you. And I'm actually amazed to see the significant variance in pricing across deals of similar size. And I'm talking upwards of 35% differences between the best and the worst pricing that's out there. And the benchmarking should cover all of your costs: enterprise name users, support costs, webinar sizes, underlying transport by country and traffic type, mobile, landline, toll free, premium call out. So, a lot of data points to have benchmarked in a deal.
Teresa, let's talk contracts for a minute. MSAs can get tricky, especially with prepayment renewals, right?
Yeah, this is a crazy space. There's really four big red flags that I see in this space. You may typically negotiate for 60 to 90-day payment terms with your suppliers, but Zoom is one of those suppliers that requires you to pay annually in advance. That shifts all the risk over to you. Oftentimes in Zoom agreements, we see 3-year terms with auto renewal clauses that give you very little time frame to not auto renew. So suggestion here is to eliminate that and to opt for renewal years at your own discretion. And these type of deals also have automatic price increase leverages out there. So you'll see language that will say the service will increase by not more than 5% per year. And so keep in mind that those automatic price ratchets are something you definitely can negotiate. And lastly is to understand your tax jurisdiction. Zoom assesses different state and local taxes based on the state that you are billed to. So this can add 8 to 10% to your cost of your Zoom licenses and your fees. So make sure you understand your tax jurisdiction.
From an IT perspective, that can get dangerous. Your usage could change significantly year to year, especially with the hybrid work trends.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best practice is to negotiate a lot of flexibility in your license counts. Don't commit to 100% of your planned usage. Do periodic optimization reviews to see what you're actually purchasing versus what you're using based on the type of persona that you have. And extend any kind of periods for cancellation so you're not locked in for the entire period of time.
So the key takeaway here is don't just accept the standard default terms from Zoom, right?
Absolutely. These are highly negotiable, and your ability and leverage to negotiate is significantly improved if you're going through an RFI or an RFP process.
Julie, SLAs are always highlighted in these deals. Are they actually useful though?
Now, honestly, not as much as people think. SLAs with Zoom are going to vary by the product. So you've got meetings, webinar, and chat, which have an uptime SLA of 99.9 or 3 nines. And then the SLA penalties for these types of products are based on 3 tiers of SLA failure that can be customized. We typically see the penalties at 10% for the first month, 20% for the second month, and 30% for the third month. So SLAs really don't cover real business impact. Obviously, Zoom's in the business of having their platform readily available for customer usage. So if they fail, it's going to impact all their customers. So the short answer, Zoom doesn't publicly report its annual uptime percentages. Its last major outage, though, happened in April of 2025, and that was reportedly due to a DNS issue with GoDaddy.
Yeah, and I agree. I think SLAs are often more about optics than protection. And I like to focus on 4 things really: the operational reliability track record, knowing the required support for your organization. Zoom offers Premier and Premier Plus a TAM or a technical account manager. These type of additional support services come as a cost, incremental cost. So making sure you understand what those options are and you have the ability in those scenarios to define your priority outage definitions and response times. You need to know your escalation paths. You need to know not just your account manager, but the chain of command above them. And in a particular interest for folks is to really use the Zoom portal to manage your environment, use the reporting that's out there, know how many licenses and things you're buying versus how many are constantly being used. So use the data that's available in the portal.
Julie, Teresa, let's bring this full circle. What should our listeners remember when negotiating a Zoom enterprise agreement?
I think, firstly, understand your current costs, look at the invoice details and your current contract pricing, map out the actual usage by product before you go to market, plan for future scalability, and don't overcommit, and then understand viable alternatives like Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, and additionally, use an RFI or an RFP to improve your leverage. Definitely benchmark, challenge the MSA terms like prepayments and auto renewals, understand your tax negotiation, and really try to negotiate for as much flexibility as possible and not just focus on price.
Thanks, Teresa and Julie, for an information-packed episode on negotiating enterprise Zoom agreements. To our listeners, if you would like to learn more about how to prepare for an upcoming Zoom renewal or best practice for sourcing these services, or if you'd like to discuss other technology strategy, sourcing, and cost reduction needs with Teresa, Julie, or me, or any of our TC2 and LB3 colleagues, please give us a call or shoot us an email. You can also stay up to date by subscribing to Staying Connected, by checking out our websites and following us on LinkedIn. And we fade to black.